narrate this along as I go. Okay, there's some assumptions that I think I like to clear up before I start on something as complex as healing from hate or reparations. And it's language, and it's like, let's get some things straight. And here's the one I think that's the big problem. The word slave has nothing to do with Africans that were stolen from Africa and enslaved in America. This word is an antique slang of the ethnic identity of large populations of enslaved white Europeans who spoke the Slavic language. And that just got translated to Africans. And that leads to the assumption that people say that slaves were taken from Africa. This is not true. People were taken from Africa and were made into slaves. I think the sooner that we learn the seduction of language, I think the quicker we're going to get rid of white supremacy. Because if I'm seen as a slave coming from my home country, nobody would want to consider me a first-class citizen. And that's what I call, you've got to be carefully taught. I imagine most people know the song from South Pacific. And that's what's happening. 2 ways to carefully teach white supremacy: omission and commission. You can omit the truth, and you can teach an untruth. And this is slideshow is about those several examples of how omission and commission has entrenched white supremacy in our minds. In other words, they're saying white supremacy, this is how white supremacy has colonized our minds, through omission and commission. And here's the first one. Now let me see, I think, here's the first one. Now, you don't see anything on your screen besides the slideshow, do you?
No, just the slides.
Just what?
Just the slide.
Okay.
And
Good.
you.
So this is the first one, is that omission. Now, Bass Reeves was a deputy marshal in Cherokee Territory of Oklahoma for 32 years, from 1875 to 1907. Within a year after his autobiography was written and published, there was a program on radio in Chicago called The Lone Ranger. And everybody now says it was based on Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves didn't fire silver bullets out of his gun, but when he would go off to catch a criminal, he might give people a silver dollar for letting him stay overnight in their place and get a meal. So he always had an Indian for interpretation, and he was smart enough not to ride a white horse, because that meant you had money, and the only people who had money were law enforcers and marshals. So one of the first omissions of the truth is the real life of Bass Reeves. He was African-American, born a slave, and during that 32 years, he never learned to read. Now, this is not real. The Lone Ranger was always an actor. He was known as the toughest cowboy to ever live. He captured over 3,000 criminals. Let's see if I can get. He even arrested Belle Starr in 1883 for her notorious horse thieving. He's the man on whom Hollywood patterned The Lone Ranger. Now, which life story would mean more to the overall social and mental health of American society? We were denied the truth, and so we grew up on a lie that supported white supremacy. And as it was a line in the film Healing from Hate that says just that. It was a white gentleman saying that white people are just so nice. They're just so good, you know, because we always see them as altruistic. The Lone Ranger rode the prairie, didn't ask for a dime. He just wanted to bring justice to the land. And that's what the program had. He was honest and innocent. The only thing necessary for tranquility in the world is that every child grows up happy. That's Chief Dan George from the White Nation, and that was a Salish group. Or is white children the only children who matter? Now you see how this has been taken over, and the narrative has been changed from a universal message of Chief Dan George to a white supremacist message of somebody, I don't know who. Spiritual quotes to live by. I don't think that's what I see in here. So again, how would knowing the truth of this philosopher would help America? Maybe change our views on the savages that needed murdered. And here's another one that really freaks me out. This is a real person, and this is not a real person. This is an actor. Now, I asked the question, would the true teenage Dr. Story have weakened white supremacy? How might you be different if you had known this truth in '89? I think that's when the program came on TV. How about all Americans born since 1989? How would their lives be different if they had known this truth and grown up side by side with this kind of truth that people of color had something to contribute and did contribute it? This guy is Balamurala Krishna Bala Ambati, is an American ophthalmologist, educator, and researcher. In May of '95, he entered the Guinness Book of Records as the world's youngest doctor at the age of 17 years.
So how could we have known it in 1989?
Yeah. Oops. I always do that. Now why? Okay. Now here's another omission and commission right here, side by side. This is what the television and stories of life show you. They show you the gangster with the woman who could be considered a kind of a loose person, not within the confines of American values. They'll show that to us. And in fact, game theories, the games that kids play without supervision, with no limits on it, with no age limits on going into our arcade, this is what you see. This gangster rapper and the loose woman, but you don't see this type because it does not support white supremacy. Rarely do we see this. I could go on and talk about, my master's was in the area of the differential portrayal of Black and white television families. So I know a little about the Black family and the comparison with white families. No comparison. We were not fit to be fit into the American society. And I think that's why a lot of people feel that America was a white country. So while white America had Charleston Heston and John Wayne, African Americans had Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks. And I think this book by Donald Bogle shows that nicely and makes that comparison very clear. Now, America is supposed to love champions, but why do you think this disparity exists? Serena, number 1, Sharapova, number 2. Sharapova, beaten by Williams 17 times. But society has felt that a champion has a skin color requirement because they have endorsed her twice as much as Serena Williams, even though Serena was a real champion when this picture was taken. Why? That's again, that question that I asked for social justice activists. Why? Why is that so? The only thing I can answer is that it's racism at work or white supremacy. So let us learn and work together as natural allies to move our country closer to its ideals embodied in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Reparation is not only for people of color, but for the soul of our nation. Thank you. Okay. And for some reason, okay. So any comments on that?
Well, first, thank you, Carl.
You're welcome. Okay, all right. Well, what I'll do, Terry, if it's okay with you, I'll just talk about, this is kind of like my intro to the film. My takeaway from watching the film Healing from Hate are 2 of my social justice guiding principles. One comes from my years of doing social justice work, and the second is the first principle of my religious Unitarian Universalist faith. What I have learned over the years of social justice involvement is to ask the question why. We many times ask the question who, where, what, when, etc. So I ask this question to you hypothetically. Why is there racism? Can you give me a good definitive answer on why is there racism? What makes grown adults spit and curse at 6-year-old, oh, and I'm forgetting her name now, who integrated New Orleans? Oh boy. I mean, she was the most beautiful little kid I've ever seen. And she looked like she walked around on matchsticks. But, and she could do no harm. But all of the white parents took their kids out of school because she walked into it. Why did they do that? What makes them do that? What makes 3 healthy white men give a Black developmentally delayed African-American a ride in their pickup and then tie him up and drag him behind their cars until he falls apart? Why would they do that? I don't understand. So I asked that question in a social justice group I was doing at my church. and it was about 5 or 7 people in the group. And I got 5 or 7 different answers to why that was racism. So if you want to solve racism, you got to know why it appeared in the first place. And that's what I like about this movie, Healing from Hate. It goes into very much detail on why and where some of these races came from. If you saw the movie, you can't avoid seeing why they became what they were. The story of this man as a child who kind of stood up to an abusive father, emotionally and physically abusive to his mother and to his kids. And he kind of stood up for his father when he was about 13, 14 years old. And he said his father knocked him across the room, knocked him out cold. And he became, after that, very vulnerable to being inducted into Aryan Brotherhood or a neo-Nazi group, because he felt wanted, he felt validated, he felt heard. So this movie lays out many different examples of how people were made predisposed to be inducted into a hate group. In the film Healing from Hate, you can see how the next guiding principle is the logical conclusion of my question, why? If we don't look for the why that underlies neo-Nazi alt-right groups, Aryan Brotherhoods, we will surely overlook the first principle of my faith, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. If we do not look into why an individual is a neo-Nazi, we may not look for or see the father that beat the young man, the foster home that abused him, or the school system that abandoned him. Without understanding the why of his or her neo-Nazi beliefs, values, or personality, we will surely miss the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So the film, to me, has the most important answer to some of the hate we see in our society, and calls us to remember our first UU principle and see that there is inherent worth in everyone, even a neo-Nazi. If you want to resolve the why of hate groups, we must first address the why. And it is clear from this film why individuals become Nazis and alt-right. The systemic failures of the US infrastructure, families, schools, service agencies, that in effect is failing all Americans. So, as Unitarian Universalists, no matter how we disagree and diverge from different philosophies, like the neo-Nazis, etc., we should not forget that there is a real human being behind that neo-Nazi facade, behind that Aryan Brotherhood facade. And there is a cause and effect. And if we want to change that, we have to look at why. And I wish that we could say that everybody watched the film, because I think I would like to open up to some concerns or questions about the film. Does anyone have any comments that they would like to make, or?
Well, what I just put in the chat, which came from Danielle Sered's book, Until We Reckon, about restorative justice. Hurt people hurt people.
Right, absolutely. You know, and that's why we should, that would kind of keep me focused on the inherent worth and dignity. I remember doing social justice over the years, and what I saw was that a lot of times activists became somewhat self-righteous and said, I know I'm on the right side of this issue. You know, and you might. If I'm not a neo-Nazi and I'm somebody else, I might say I'm on the right side of this issue. So this person is wrong. And I might take an antagonistic stance, a holier than thou attitude towards that neo-Nazi, and overlook the inherent worth and dignity of that individual. So my sense is that we have to go out there believing in the inherent worth and dignity of everybody. We can't allow ourselves to fall into the trap of hating people. Now, these are strong statements, and that's why I'm hoping someone will challenge that or correct me, or, you know. So
Part of it is the whole culture, isn't it, Carl? I mean, they can get away with some of that because for years we've, for centuries, literally, we've been living in this water of racism and and tribalism of a kind and we're still in the tribalism. Even UUs we tend to see other UUs or college educated people that somewhat think as we do. I mean, it's huge. To me, it's so huge. I just think it has to be attacked. Attack isn't the right word, but addressed on many, many levels. Not only loving the hateful, hate-filled people, but the whole cultural mirage or
yeah, well,
water.
Well, I agree with you, except I don't see what we live in as a static situation.
Yes.
I think we are being actively taught every day that white is better. We are being actively and carefully taught that white supremacy is real and it's valid. Now, if you go to movies now about Black people, who's seen a movie about a Black person lately? The Green Book. What did you see, Lucy?
The August Wilson film, for example, Fences is one.
Okay.
We were watching the Underground Railroad, but it's really painful to watch. I mean, it's so abusive. It's 12 years a slave I had to walk out on. I didn't find that entertaining. I found it torture for me too.
I think some of them are so disgusting that it's a turnoff. I'm not sure that Hollywood is making that film for me, or it's making a film to show white America that these people can take a lot of punishment and keep on going. It doesn't kill them, so maybe we are justified in oppressing them. It doesn't sow me as a human being. It doesn't show me with pride and dignity.
When you were talking about people being holier than thou, there was an article in the New York Times this week about people who do acts of kindness, and the ones who make a big deal out of it, people discount. They don't like people who make a big deal out of being charitable. But we respect people who hide it. In fact, it was Oscar Wilde who said something about, it's really great when you do something anonymously that's really good and somebody finds out about it and tells everybody.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that question is that there's a phenomenon, and in the movies they call it a trope. It's like a repeated theme. It's like in the movie The Green Book. The movie is supposed to be about a Black man whose talents were rejected by white America, essentially. But what the movie turns into is how a white man is so nice to a Black man and does so much to protect him. They call that trope the white savior. If you want to get a good laugh out of life, Google the term white savior, and you'll get all kinds of movies and the analysis of why they are white saviors. And the movie turns out to be about a white person who saves Black people. A story of a white woman going into a Black community and teaching the Black kids how to write. The Writers Project or something like that. And to me, it's embarrassing. It's disgusting. It's humiliating. So watch out for movies about Black people, because it ends up showing how good white people are to them. So we're being carefully taught, everybody, that white supremacy is the real deal. Now, I don't know how many people follow sports, but a few years ago, all sports teams, and especially basketball, professional basketball teams, had two jerseys. They had a jersey for the road and a jersey for home. I see you're nodding, Shadow. Yeah. One was white and the other one was a different color, black or gold or whatever the second color in their uniform was. But it was required, not required as such, but it was the unwritten rule was that you wore your white uniform when you played home games. Why? Because you won more home games than you did games on the road. And so white then would be symbolized with the better team, no matter how Black they were. So, yeah.
Call on Shoto.
Oh, that is astounding to me. I nodded because my high school team had two colors of jerseys, and everyone always wore white at home and their school colors somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it made it easy for the players to tell who was what. And it just seemed like a simple thing. And to think that this was planned for the purpose of associating white. I mean, I'm aware that in every arena of life, white is associated with good and Black is associated with bad, except finances. But it's just kind of like, wow, to connect that with the basketball jerseys.
You have to be carefully taught. If you're not carefully taught, you will figure it out. And you will see through the guise, the disguise.
Oh. Okay.
So anyone who says, I got my college degree, so I'm smarter than that, and I don't stoop to that. but you just don't know you've been taught. So
Well-
my sense is that we have to understand how we are taught if we want to defend ourselves against it. Now, I think that when I'm dealing with reparations, my theory there is that the consciousness that created chattel slavery is still operating in the United States. It's operating very powerfully. If you look at January the 6th this year, I was reading the book, The Wicked War. And it's about the Mexican War and how unfair that was. And the same thing happened when Polk was president, James Polk, in one of his terms. And so that just flooded me with the sense that this ain't over. Just because Trump is out of there, this ain't over. And if you want to read some of our atrocities, you go back and just look at our history. If you can find an accurate history book, just read it. Yeah, Lucy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. At the end of the movie, or somewhere near there, they said that their group, which was doing helpful work with people to get out, had reached 100 people.
Yeah.
And I just, given the literally millions who are still in that boat, just
Yeah.
on what you're talking about right now, I felt despairing.
Yeah, me too.
It's like, is that the only way we can approach this? I mean, what else can we do
Mhm. Well,
for the millions, literally?
let's go back to my first question. Why? Why are there neo-Nazis? Why are there Aryan Brotherhoods? And what that movie shows is that it was the Department of Child Care foster homes who was as abusive or more abusive than the families. It was the families who were beating their kids, ignoring them, and not knowing how to parent. It was other things. They told there was a roadmap on why those young men, some of those young men, at least 100 of them, who contributed their stories to healing from hate, group.
Was Mitch McConnell beaten as a kid? I mean, there's so many millions that they're not all beaten up, but they're buying into it.
Yeah.
They're pretending that nothing happened on the 6th.
But anyway, that's how we solve it, Lucy, for the masses. That's how we solve it for the masses. We make social services. We bring back good mental health services, mental health clinics. We bring back school systems that can assess that a child is being abused at home.
Okay, I agree.
Okay, this is how we stop it.
Slow.
Yeah, this is how we stop it. We stop it like Lone Ranger did. We cut them off at the pass. We actually start the services and the systems of our culture that are creating this atmosphere to hate.
Okay.
And if we don't do that, if we don't put money into our culture, if we don't make prison a place for rehabilitation, and not for learning new tricks of the trade. We're not going to get there.
I agree.
You know, one thing that I've seen is foster care is a really wicked system. It turns the kids out when they're 18, they're nowhere near ready. But it would seem as though they could take, they're putting families that don't have housing in hotels and things. It would seem as though they could take a small hotel and make that a place for teaching the parents how to be better, because it really isn't good to take kids away from their parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there, we act as if we are ignorant and stupid as a nation. And look at the prison system in Sweden and Denmark. I mean, that's places for rehabilitation. You make a person feel respected. That's what the neo-Nazis said. I didn't feel respected. I didn't feel empathized with. I didn't feel validated. I didn't feel legitimate. And what do we do to people in prison? We treat them like animals. That's no way. See, our institutions are, well, let me not say it's not the institutions, the people that define these institutions that are failing us, that are failing the people who need their help the most.
Our society is so focused on revenge and retribution and not on health and healing.
Right. And we got too many for-profit prisons. That's one of them. So, so that to me is, and that's the way I look at reparations. How do we get reparations, a critical mass of people to make reparations work? And I go back to a statement by Martin Luther King Jr. He said he was confronted, not confronted, but he was, a good friend of his made the statement, you can't legislate morality. And he thought about it a second or two, and then he said, no, you can't legislate morality. You have to win hearts first. And to me, if I want somebody to be a reparationist, to support reparation, what I think we should do is to make sure that Black history is part of their lives. Now, 2 states, Connecticut and New Jersey, have mandated that in the elementary and secondary classes, they need so many African-American history points to graduate. Now, if kids are taught that the Lone Ranger was a lie, if kids are taught that Tarzan was a lie and that Superman was a lie, they weren't all white men, or, I mean, there was no white man to be a Superman. There was no white man, there was a Tarzan. Has anyone ever thought that a vine that Tarzan swings on like a freeway, and it takes him right to the door of where he's going? That vines grow from the ground up. You can't hardly swing on something that grows from the ground up and make it swing like that. But Tarzan was, what do you call it? A special case. All of the psychological studies I read of kids who survived in the wild, brought up by either wolves or something else, said that those kids never learned to talk. Now, Tarzan was a special case because not only did he learn how to talk, which was, he was the only case that happened that way, but he learned how to master the world. He mastered the world. He went back to England and became Greystoke or something. He adapted to Wall Street, even though he was one in a billion cases of people who learned how to read and write after being taught by wolves. But Tarzan turns out to be the death of Head Start, because Tarzan was seen as a person who had innate intelligence, not environmentally trained in intelligence. So you can't teach somebody to be intelligent. They have to have it. They have to be innate. And that argument was, Tarzan was one of the people kind of used in that fictional world. That Head Start, you're not going to change their intelligence, even though Head Start programs were showing that they increased the kids' intelligence 7 to 8 points, 10 points. But the people who didn't want it said that Blacks, once you get past the age of 4, you can't change the intelligence very much after that. The environment, it's like nature versus nurture. Nature is that you're born with it and you got it. Nurture is that the environment is rich and you benefit from that, you grow. Well, Tarzan disproved that for millions of Head Start kids, and they started to cut back on those programs. So you've got to be carefully taught. And so again, if anybody has questions or anything, just.
You know, I noticed in the movie, everybody who came out of those organizations, they initiated that themselves. And some of them were shocked by events. Some of them did other things. So out of this and out of the discussion tonight, I know someone, I don't think he's a neo-Nazi, but he's pretty far right. And any attempt of mine, when I've tried to talk with him, I have taken the listening approach. I've listened and understood his situation. But in that particular case, there's no reciprocal intent from him, I don't think, to listen to me. So I just throw that out there. I don't have a conclusion. I thought the movie was very interesting and the emphasis on listening, but I'm not sure it can always be implemented unless the other person is already starting to think and wonder themselves.
I saw a newsletter today that tries to talk to people of all persuasions. It says, you'll never get a liberal to listen to Fox News or a conservative to listen to MSNBC, but they put out these little 5-minute things that kind of give a chance to for some crosstalk. I just found it. I don't know whether it's any good or not, but it's an interesting thought, you know.
One of the things is that if you confront people that, look, neo-Nazi guy in front of me, you're sick and you need to change. You're not going to go anywhere. So I think about Martin Luther King saying, you got to change hearts first. And so my sense is that not to go after the neo-Nazis. They have to almost come to you. That's what happened in the movie. the people who came out of the neo-Nazi or their hate groups came to those people somehow. Well,
How do you react when they do?
say that again?
And how do you react when they do?
Well,
Because-
they're trained. They
Yeah.
were ex-neo-Nazis themselves, so they know how to train. So I couldn't do their work. But what I can do is to get on the case of my legislators and say, make DSS, the Department of Social Services, work for the kids. Make that prison system in my state a nonprofit organization. Make that prison system rehab people instead of treating them like they're still a criminal and they will always be a criminal. So that's what I can do, and it precludes the neo-Nazis. It doesn't convert them back from neo-Nazis or hate. It just precludes them from becoming.
Yeah.
And if we can do the same thing for reparations, if we can teach children that African Americans had a important place in American history. In every aspect of American science, you have African American men and women. The blood that had the plasma separated from it, that saved so many lives by Charles Drew. Not many people know that he did that. He was an African American man. But not many people know either is that some soldiers in the army and the military in World War II died because they didn't want any black blood in their body. So, and the government went along with this though. That's the hard part, because they gave them a waiver. They gave them a waiver and said, here's what it says. If you get wounded and you need blood, would you take African American blood? Many of them said, no, I don't want blood. I'll die first. So the government supported the notion that black blood is different than white blood. And so that's why we're still out there believing in white supremacy. Any more thoughts? Let's see, I saw something in the chat here. Okay.
Oh,
Oh,
Black
Shadow,
Panther.
somebody said Black Panther.
Yeah,
Now,
that was
what-
when you were asking about movies. And then
Yeah.
I thought that Nat Turner movie, I mean, and so Black Panther was like a lovely fantasy, but that the Turner, and then is it called The Legacy of Nat Turner? That was really hard to watch. I mean,
Yeah, now which one?
Nat Turner? I think it's
Hmm.
called The Legacy of Nat Turner.
Mhm.
I had to look it up just now, but I did, and it showed him, and then his preaching, and then his baptizing, and his owners, supported it, and then they hauled him around to all the plantations to pacify the slaves, and then it showed some of the things that were doing with the slaves, and finally he led a rebellion, and they just went around killing. That's my vague memory of this film, which I did not check an actual history, but the atrocities were amazing.
Yeah,
It was a relief when he finally said, no, this isn't going to happen anymore.
yeah. There are more ways than one where they can separate white superiority in movies by not necessarily telling the truth about it or showing that it's actually a white man behind it that makes it successful.
Well, wait. Can you relate that to the movie I just described?
Black Panther?
No. Oh, and Black Panther is a fantasy. The Nat Turner one.
Which one was that? The Healing from Hate?
It was called The Legacy of Nat Turner.
Oh, okay. No, I read the book on him. I didn't see the movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, right. But so you said there's a white, are you talking about in fictional movies? There's a white man behind the black hero?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Primarily in the movies. And how did that occur in that movie, or did it occur in the movie?
I did, well, so there was a place when he was a child when I think it was the woman he wanted to read, and he was getting punished for it, and then the woman owner gave him a Bible, and so he learned to read on the Bible, and then he became a preacher. And then they started exploiting him. So if there was a place where there was a white person driving his movement, I didn't see it there.
Well, he wasn't successful, so
He died.
you might say that they didn't need a white man to
Right.
fail, but
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, there's some cases that's quite different. I was going to say that there's not only the white savior trope that
Mhm.
makes a difference or distinguishes Black films from white films, and white supremacy is taught, in a more subtle way. But so yeah, it's complicated, and not there's more tropes out there than just the white savior that we can see. Now I've noticed some movies now that they're showing African Americans in the movies. The theme of that movie is like, one of them, when it's a white man, it's like more like, and if they don't succeed here, if they succeed here, they save the world. Not only the country, but they save the world. Whereas, even the Black Panther, they weren't working on a theme that would save the world. It's not that scope wasn't that big. It was more like in-house fighting. So that movie didn't have the scope that you would see a white man in. So that's how they can distinguish white from Black movies, and white supremacists from, everyday people who are not really out there contributing to America, because they're not saving the world. So, yeah. So Dick, did you have a question? Anyone else have a question? Let's see if there's any more in the chat. Okay. No.
Not.
Yeah, Ralph.
It's wonderful being back among you and seeing the good work that you're continuing. And to you, Carl, there was two things. One is, are you continuing? I don't know if Willard's involved. I'm really out of it as far as GA goes, but last year your presentation with him and Reverend Ari, and what that pointed to was very powerful and very encouraging. And then, you know, the pandemic bit down on us, but I don't know if you're continuing that
Yeah,
push.
we will. We have the same title, Reparations
good.
Rooted in Repair. I don't happen to have our flyer right now,
Okay.
but I think it's on Friday at
Good,
5 o'clock Eastern time or something like that.
good. I'll do the work and track that down. Well, just before coming here, our local Sangha, I think UU congregations, and I don't know, Terry, if you've that's been part of your agenda, but I just got off an interview with Resma Menachem, my grandmother's hands, and this was a very. Do you know him?
Say
Nobody?
the name again.
Resma, Menakem. Sometimes I think it's Menachem, the way he says it. He is promoting something he calls somatic abolition, but it was a common read for UU congregations. And though he eschews guru worship, I am very appreciative of his approach. I wish I knew what I knew now about transgenerational epigenetic trauma. About a year and a half ago, I was sitting with Willard Lett, our regional director and a member of national member of NCOBRA, and next to him was another friend of mine, because I have friends around the circle. And this, if he wasn't a Trumper, he was a quasi-Trumper. And the word reparation came out, and he was panning it. He wasn't even entertained. He was a white Irish, grew up in Lawrence, where I live now, Massachusetts. And fortunately, my friend Richard McCarthy was there, and Rich is a little bit hard of hearing, and he was 88 at the time, but he just, when he heard reparations, he said, I believe in that. Now, the interesting thing is that as the people who demonized this hemisphere, the French, the Belgians, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the English, had all come off a centuries reign of traumatizing terror. I mean, they had 100 years war. We didn't even have 100 years war. It's only 20 years in Afghanistan. But they came to this country traumatized in their own self. And the Irish, who were then conscripted to fight the Mexicans so that they could become citizens and distinguish themselves as white, they themselves had unhealed trauma. And so at a later point, when my friend said, do you think because I'm Irish and the English, persecuted us for 500 years, we should have reparations? And I said, of course, of course. That's justice. It's balancing things out. But he doesn't see that yet in himself. He has, Menachem would say, in his white body, will have his trauma, black body trauma, and also blue body trauma, because you can't traumatize someone without being traumatized yourself.
I agree.
So all the police who are to be felt for. And at the end of your talk last year, you just haven't changed, Carl, as long as I've known you. You ended on this note. It said, we've got to love each other. In the book, My Grandmother's Hands, completely recommend this as far for our healing work going forward. We have to face our own traumas. I could even make the case that men, look, we're friends, right? You're not going to let this out. But men, boys are
This
as
is the UUJEC
traumatized,
webinar.
as much traumatized, if not more, than females. Now, why would I say such an extraordinary thing? The demands that were put on me as a boy to be tough, and if I got into a fight, not to come home, you better go back out there and straighten this mess out. The indoctrination, it's just something I didn't want. I felt growing up that I was conscripted for this war that I did not want to fight at all. And fortunately, I had role models like my heavily closeted piano teacher. I'm going to say his name, Philip Santanocito. What a wonderful name. And he introduced music, and he recognized my completeness, desires in me that were called, feminist and feminine and sissy and so on and so forth. And I've benefactors along the way. But this work of dealing with my own trauma, I was brought up very much like this fellow. I wrote a story, I might send it to you, Carl, about what I went through as a child. And yes, hurt people, hurt is a two-way thing. You can hurt, you feel terrible. Now, whether you go out and hurt somebody else is something else.
Yeah.
So in our groups together, we need to see each of us this. I accept it the same way I'm working with it because it seems to work. Transgenerational epigenetic injury, that generation to generation to generation. We talk about it in addictions. I know my grandfather was an alcoholic, and you could just see my family, it's passed down. And so I could say maybe it is in the genes. But even if it's nature reinforced all the time, you're white, you're right, so on and so forth. You're black, you can take it, and so forth. To face it in ourselves on a somatic level. So that the other night in my group, when we saw a photograph of the famous lynching in Duluth, Minnesota in 1920 that Resmaa Menakem cites in his book, there were people that the leader of the group had phoned ahead of time and said, "You're not going to want to see this. You've read about it, but I don't want to see it." He was very, very careful. But I saw it. And when I saw the 30 white men around the 3 black murdered, lynched persons, I saw them, and they were not strangers to me. I could have been bullied into that mob. And people kept saying, why would anybody do this? Why would anybody stand in that crowd?
Yeah. Mhm.
Because we have succumbed to these tendencies in ourselves. The only choice is whether we're going to nurture the good impulses or the other ones. But I could have been in that crowd. Somebody said, "What would you do? Would you go run to the police?" Well, you're not going to run to the police because the police probably knew exactly what was happening, Terry. You're right. We'll run into the middle of them and say, "This is horrible. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You're all Christians." Well, their pastors might have been in that group, so on. So every time we make somebody into the other, which I think is what you've represented it all the time that I've known you, Carl. Every time we do that other, we open opportunities for us then to work upon them as if they are less. Now that that certainly doesn't mean that I'm not going to listen to whatever. My policy is, if someone comes to me, if a kid comes to me and says, "Oh, there's a ghost in my closet, I'm afraid," I'm not going to say there's no such thing as ghosts. I'm going to say, let's check this out. A woman comes to me and says, I've been abused by my boss. I'm going to listen. All up and down the line. The first thing is to suspect that there could be some truth in this situation, right? So that has to go on. The Black Lives Movement has to go on in full force. But to give up on people, and so I think as you use, you do more folks than I do, but we got to get out there and connect with and have those quote unquote difficult conversations. But in our peace groups, who actually knows these Trumpers, let alone the Chauvins and so on and so forth? But Resmaa Menakem works with police. You know, there's 18,000 police forces, and almost all of them have white supremacists in their ranks. Policing and white supremacy go hand in hand. How to
This came from, you
reach
know.
them? Okay, I'm done. I don't get out much, and it's really good to see you folks.
Well, you know, the police force was really the slave watchers, the slave patrols. That's where our police came from. But it's also a group of what I would think people who see themselves as the brain trust of the police force is the fraternal order of the police. They supposed to know everything.
That's what Keith Ellison said. I've been a union man all my life. I haven't met a union I didn't like until I met the police union in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That's how that worked out.
So it's I think I might say to you that there's more ways to there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they always said in Oklahoma. And to resolve a phenomena that we see, racism or lynchings or things like that. How do we solve that? Well, if I can do one thing well, I think I should be doing that one thing well. But it may not be meeting face to face with a lyncher and say, you're wrong. I think that's the antagonistic stance that I warn against social justice taking. Because you can't be antagonistic to people that you want to convert or even communicate with. You don't go out there trying to convert somebody. You go out there to communicate. And one of the things that those individuals who founded Healing from Hate, or what he said, so I listen much more than I talk. And so unless you know what's on this person's mind, we can't start solving the problem. And to me, I think I wouldn't want to put somebody out there who doesn't know how to solve the problem when it's presented to them. If you have somebody who's naive, or if you have somebody who is inexperienced, you have to have some great skills of listening. You got to have some great skills of timing before you can go out and deal with someone who's as advanced in their way of life as a neo-Nazi or a pro-lyncher. Now, before I started in reparations about 3 or 4 years ago, I was searching for the identity of the United States. Where did the identity of the United States come from? I ran across this trilogy by Richard Slotkin, and it's called, that's what he calls it, he was searching for the identity of the United States. Let me get the book. As soon as I got on this issues, along comes reparations. Now, this is one of the first ones. It says, regeneration through violence. And the question was, did we get our identity from the Wild West? Or was the Wild West brought on by our identity as Americans? And I start to wonder about that too, because in the movie Healing from Hate, they were saying this is a white nation. But that's also what they were saying during chattel slavery times. This is a white nation, no blacks belong here. The sundown towns was an example of Black people, you can't stay in this town after sundown, we'll kill you. And they would, if you stayed in town. And some places lightened up on that a little bit, but they made African Americans post, in some cases, a $500 bond before they could live in their town. Now, $500 back in the 17th century, that's over a year of wages, because you'd only make $15 a month. That was pretty doggone good pay. So where did we get our identity? Did the Wild West teach us how to be what we are today? I think it came much sooner than that, because the trauma that the colonizers went through with the American Indians was tough. I gotta give it to them. They survived. They survived by hook or crook, but they survived. It's interesting though, that in Jamestown, there was one basically attack where not one African-American person was killed in that Indian attack. Not one African-American was killed.
Carl, can you put the name of the book in the chat? Shoto wanted to know what that was.
Okay, I can put them in. This is called Regeneration Through Violence, 1600 to 1860. And this one is called let's say, I don't think that's the second. It's called The Gunfighter Nation. And then this one is called The Fatal Environment. So I can put these, I'll put these in. And they're all by Richard Slotkin. All right, here we go. Chat. Okay, to everyone.
Richard something, the author is what I need, actually, because I'm gonna go for my library shortly. And I mean, if you just spelled his name, that would be fine too.
You must be out west. You've got sun coming through the screen. Shoto.
No, I'm in Minnesota.
Oh, okay. Your days are just long.
That they, oh, right,
7:30,
you're in
yeah.
Iowa. Yeah,
That's
10.
8:30 there.
it is 8:30, yes.
Yeah. My clock, I'm in Eastern time, but my clock is still
Oh.
Central time.
Really? Okay.
Well, I don't change it when I'm only here for a week, so.
Ah, okay. So Richard somebody is the author of these very interesting sounding books.
Richard
Flat-
Slatkin.
There it is. Oh. Slatkin, S-L-A-T-K.
Slotkin. Okay, they're all there. Gunfighter Nation by Richard Slatkin, and all the rest are too. The Fatal Environment and Regeneration Through Violence. But violence is with one L, not two. So
And you-
anyway, I think that's a good start. I was also looking at the Black West, which is another omission from our history books. And there were plenty of Black cowboys and who lived out in the wilds. There were also many Black Indians that they joined the Indian Nation and became chiefs among the Indians. In fact, what is it? One of the Cherokees, John Horse, he was chief of a Black group of Seminoles in Florida. And the government could not get them out of Florida. And the Indian group, I forget the name of the person who was the chief of the Indian group. He surrendered to the US Army, but John Horse and his group never did. And there's a sign on the road, on one of the roads down in the Florida area, dedicated to the Seminole Indians who never surrendered to the US government.
Well, it's amazing how people will affiliate and find their affinity with each other if one lets them. There were 40 revolutions before the 1776 revolution. Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States, and groups of either freed or escaped enslaved people, Indians, and indentured servants came together and formed communities, white, black, red, brown, and they were against the oppression of, you want to know the identity of the United States. I think it's a continuation of the European empire.
Absolutely.
Okay, in a nutshell, again, bringing all that trauma, and unless we recognize it, Resmaa Menakem, who's a somatic therapist and a lot of other things, who's worked in 53 army bases in Afghanistan with our highly traumatized military there. So there's no fooling around, and with police as well. He's either going to have results or he isn't. And all through the book, he's offering ways of healing and changing ourselves. I've been involved in anti-racism work since Bill Gardner and the Crossroads. Do you know that, Lucy? We had the Crossroads training. And I mean, the UUA has struggled with anti-racism. You know, our good friend Jack Mendelson almost split the denomination. He left with, I don't know, 400 delegates in Boston in 1969, was it?
Mhm.
The Black empowerment controversy, has that ever been laid to rest? I submit no. I remember Vic Carpenter in 1985. Was it? What was the thing? The Journey Toward Wholeness.
Yeah.
And he stood up and he said, rarely, and this is Vic Carpenter, who's got creds, out the kazoo. And he said, rarely has a denomination been given a second chance to come be honest with itself and move forward. And that's 1985. And no criticism, because it doesn't get anywhere. But here we are again. The 2 days ago was the anniversary of George Floyd. Tulsa's coming up, or has.
It's today.
And I wanted to ask you, Carl, did you grow up near Tulsa? Did you have family that experienced
No.
that? Okay. All right. But I think if you're Black in America, that was the great shining point, the Wall Street, Black Wall Street. And
Actually,
how many times?
CNN is doing a special as we speak, started
Oh.
at 9 on Tulsa.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
My
Well,
son and I,
I didn't grow up in Tulsa, but I grew up in Langston. I went to school in Langston, but I was a farmer. And
yeah,
Langston is all Black town. So Oklahoma had more all Black towns, I think, at one time than all the other states combined. So they were serious about their all Black towns. Boldy, Langston, gosh, you name it, Slick. So they knew what they needed to come out with a healthy mental perspective. Now, what I want to ask Terry is that we were going to stop at 9:30, weren't we?
Yeah,
8 to 9:30.
but people do like to talk.
um, well, it's been a sheer delight, and I'm going to try to find a way to get to GA somehow, volunteer. I'd be happy to volunteer with any of you if I can.
Well, our parts will probably end up on our website. The reparations, I don't know if we'll get that one, but we have one on religion and socialism. And that one I know is going to end up on the website because we have a recording of it.
That's great. I hope you do the same, Carl.
Yeah.
Yeah, recorded.
Okay.
I'm ready to call it a night myself.
I'm ready to go to the restroom, but whatever works. Okay.
Great
So
pleasure.
I recall the name of the young lady that integrated New Orleans school. It was Ruby Bridges,
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
6 years old, and she got plastered.
Yeah.
She was surrounded by marshals, but boy, and a brave. I can't think of someone as tiny as she was that could stand up to that kind of treatment and not be traumatized for life.
Okay.
But-
I'm going to hit the end meeting. Is that all right, everybody?
To be continued.
Okay.
And Lucy,
Right.
while I see your shining face, I just wanted to say, I can remember back to Miami and your mother hen, my daughter, Angela, and that had a formative influence on her. Never left her.
Oh, good.
And
Good.
thank you so much.
Sure.
All the best, my friends.
That was one of my
Thank you.
favorite places.